So we just saw that the increase in internal surface area and having 2 openings made digestion much more efficient, which means we can get much more energy out of food. Okay, so we're getting those nutrients out of food, but now how do we move them around the body, right? How do we transport this stuff around the body? How do we get waste out from all the cells and then get it out of the body to the excretory system? How do we get the food from the digestive system to all the other cells in the body? How do we do this? That's our next problem that we're going to try and see how animals solved. Moving materials around the body. So here we focus mostly on transport of nutrients and waste and gas exchange systems and the general evolutionary trends that we see in these types of systems. So again, increase in body size and increase in metabolic needs means that simple diffusion is just too slow. It's just not going to happen fast enough, right? Sponges, their water is helping them move their food around. They're using these amoeba sites, but they're not active, right? They're not getting up and moving around and hunting their prey and producing specialized venom and things like that, right? They're not really using a ton of energy besides just using that energy to replace dead or dying cells. Okay. Other animals, though, as we start to see an increase in body size and an increase in complexity, and an increase in moving more towards a active predator lifestyle, that requires a lot more energy. We can get it out with the digestive system, but now we've got to figure out how to move those nutrients around the body. How do we get the nutrients from the digestive system to all the cells that need them? How does that happen? Well, we can't just use simple diffusion, because otherwise cells in our brain would never, well, they would, but it'd probably take about 200 plus years to get food from our digestive system if we were just relying on diffusion. So first solution, just increase the surface area. We can stay thin. We like this platyhelminthes right here. There's no circulatory system in this animal, but it's super, super thin. So it can still rely on simple diffusion to move stuff around its body. Because those materials, especially gas, oxygen and carbon dioxide, doesn't have too far to travel when it's just a few cells thick. Okay, so a lot of these organs, especially for gas exchange, tend to have a very thin surface area, but a really large surface area. Okay, thin but large maximizes the rate of diffusion. We can start to include some branches, right? So here's a feather worm right here. So this is part of the segmented worms, the annelids. This is actually part of both their respiratory organ and their feeding organ. And they have many, many kind of feathers, literally, coming off that are all little tiny branches that each little tiny tendril, I guess you could say, coming off of the feather, has a huge surface area for exchanging gas as well as trapping food. Okay, so not too bad. And we can increase the number of folds, right? So like here's a cross-section of a gill. So some of these guys sometimes have gills coming up off of their outside, sticking out their body. This is a cross-section of a gill. And we can see there's a huge amount of folding. What does that folding do? That folding increases the surface area available for gas exchange or nutrient absorption or whatever that organ is doing. Folding it up increases the surface area without massively increasing the volume of that organ. Larger animals, especially animals that are not aquatic, large surface area externally doesn't really do it, because living on land, you don't want a large surface area exposed to the air because you're going to dry out. So now, especially animals that start to live on land, we see a shift towards internal bulk transport to move fluid around the body. So that way we can exchange gases with the respiratory system and move materials from the digestive system to the rest of the body, or from the rest of the body, take that waste away and send it out of the body, right, to the excretory system. So large animals, especially large animals that live on land, have specialized transport systems. Usually a pump a heart of some sort, and vessels to direct where is that fluid going. So that way we can transport material in that fluid to different parts of the body. So transport systems, there's a wide variety of them. They're all going to have a muscular pump, vessels to move that fluid through, at least for a short period of time in some animals, and then some sort of fluid with respiratory pigments. So in us, our respiratory pigments are red blood cells, and specifically they're containing hemoglobin, which has iron, which bonds to oxygen. Other animals are going to use different respiratory pigments, like horseshoe crabs have blue blood because their respiratory pigments uses copper. But the idea here is we have fluid in which things like nutrients can move through, waste can move through, gases can move through. We contain it all in vessels, so that way it will move quickly, as opposed to just plopping it down out in the body, right? The vessels help increase the speed at which that fluid moves, and a pump to keep that fluid moving throughout the body, to increase the volume of fluid that can be moved over time. Animals, we tend to see two types of circulatory system in animals, open circulatory system and closed circulatory system. And this is really referring to, do the vessels create a complete loop with the heart, or do the vessels extend for a short period into the body and then end, and then that fluid would move back up to the heart just through the movement of the animal. So like we have a closed circulatory system, so do annelids, right? Heart pumps the blood through the vessels. The vessels don't ever just end. They're going to move, let's say maybe this branches out to the digestive system. Part of this will branch out to the respiratory system, and then it'll pick up or drop off materials and then continue back on through the heart until it's circulated again, right? So it is contained in its entire loop in a vessel, as opposed to this open circulatory system, like we see in most arthropods. We have many hearts that are lining this main aorta along the ventral side of the animal. And those are just connected to short little tubes, short little vessels, which pump their technically hemolymph. We don't call it blood, we call it hemolymph. They pump that hemolymph into the body, and then due to kind of movements of the animal, it will slowly kind of wiggle and make its way through the rest of the body of the animal, and then eventually get taken back up by the aorta, and then pump back out through the hearts, through the vessels, right? So these hearts basically draw in and push out the blood, but it's not, hemolymph, but it's not contained for its entire journey in a vessel. That's the main difference between open and closed circulatory systems. And again, what's getting transported in this fluid? Gases are going to be either bound to those respiratory pigments, or they're going to be dissolved in that fluid. The fluid is mostly water for most animals. It's mostly water. We're going to transport monomers, the organic building blocks of things like sugars and proteins and nucleotides. Anything that has been broken down by the digestive system into its smaller components can get transported through this fluid. Wastes, right? Cells will excrete their wastes into this transport fluid, and then that can be sent to the excretory system and sent out to the rest of the world. Just gotten rid of. Get rid of it. It's gone. Don't think about it anymore. Hormones and signaling molecules will often be transported through this fluid as well, whether it's hemolymph or blood. Blood is technically the difference between blood and hemolymph. Blood is contained for its entire journey in a vessel. Hemolymph is just secreted into the body cavity, basically. So hormones are molecules that affect the functions of other cells, and so they help direct the development of an animal or help it respond to things that are going on in its environment. Gas exchange organs are tightly linked to these transport systems, so all animals need to bring in oxygen and exhale carbon dioxide, and we see a lot of these same general themes here with gas exchange systems as we do with transport systems. So most vertebrates have lungs, so vertebrates being things with the backbone. Most vertebrates are going to have some sort of lung. Other aquatic animals that are not vertebrates also have things like gills as well. that have a very similar structure, but the key is massive surface area, right? So here's a casting of a rat lung, all of these tiny little branches in an even smaller branches, so we can have a huge surface area, lots of branching here, large surface area compared to the relatively small internal volume of the lungs. Gills here, we get many, many layers of these gill filaments, and each gill filament, each of these little gill filaments is also branched as well, right? So we increase the surface area, that means there's just a lot more space for diffusion of gases to occur. And then this is usually, these respiratory organs, these gas exchange organs are usually connected to the transport system, the circulatory system, to facilitate the movement of those gases around. Insects kind of went a different direction with their gas exchange organs, so they don't have lungs or gills, they have what's called a tracheal system. So lining the body of an insect, they'll have tiny little spiracles, which are just little openings to the outside world. Some insects can regulate if these are open or closed, but the key is that air is going to flow in to those spiracles. They're going to have many, many branches, so these trachea tubes are what we call the tube which air flows through an insect. And they're going to branch off and keep branching until these tracheoles interface with cells, and then they'll gas exchange directly with those cells that they connect with. So here, you have the tracheoles are connecting to, I don't know, maybe this is a muscle cell that's controlling the wing. So this muscle cell needs a lot of oxygen and needs to get rid of a lot of carbon dioxide. So that gas exchange is going to happen directly at this connection with the tracheoles, and then it'll pump back out in the air. Well, some insects have a pump, but usually it's more of a passive process of just having this tube open, this little spiracle open to the outside world. So there's a lot of adaptations that insects have to make this more efficient, especially if they're flying and need more oxygen to feed the cellular respiration of their wing muscles. But the idea here is that we still have massive internal surface area, but instead of one opening, mouth or gills, we have many openings across the entire body, and each of the tubes basically interfaces directly with the cells that need oxygen.